Mistress lied that Millionaire's pregnant wife cheated. He only discovered the truth at her funeral. Ethan Sinclair had everything a man could dream of: an empire built from the ground up, a glamorous lifestyle in the heart of Chicago, and a radiant wife named Catherine who was expecting their first child. Yet on a cold January morning, his entire world splintered. One whisper, one lie would upend everything he thought he knew and drive him to abandon the woman who vowed to stand by him until the end. By the time the truth surfaced, it was too late to make amends. What truly happened? And how does one mistake spiral into tragedy so devastating that even millions of dollars can't undo the damage? Ethan Sinclair was not born into wealth. He'd grown up in a modest, two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Cleveland, the son of a single mother who juggled 3 jobs to keep the lights on. Determined to change his fate, Ethan worked tirelessly through high school, setting his sights on a scholarship at Northwestern University. Fate smiled upon him. He earned that scholarship in business and never looked back. By the age of 35, Ethan had founded Sinclair Innovations, a tech startup that eventually partnered with giants like Microsoft and IBM. Within a few short years, he soared to multimillionaire status. Amidst this dizzying climb, Ethan met Catherine Marshall. She was a bright, compassionate interior designer working for a well-known company, Haven and Company, that had collaborated with Sinclair Innovations to revamp their office spaces. Catherine had grown up in rural Wisconsin, her eyes brimming with dreams of making beautiful spaces that felt like home. They bonded over late-night discussions about aesthetics versus practicality, form and function blending in perfect harmony. It was as though the world conspired to bring together two souls whose ambitions and passions sparked flames in one another. Before long, Ethan realized Catherine was the one who added color to every black and white blueprint of his life. Their dates were spent exploring Chicago's architectural gems, attending philanthropic galas, and talking about a shared future. Ethan fell for Catherine's kindness, her ability to notice the lonely intern in the corner and engage them in conversation, or the way she greeted the janitor by name each morning. It was in these moments that Ethan saw the sincerity of her heart. They married 2 years later in a spectacular ceremony at the Art Institute of Chicago, surrounded by friends, family, and business associates. The city lights glowed beneath the starry evening sky as they promised to love each other forever. Catherine discovered she was pregnant almost a year into their marriage. The news came on a sunny Sunday morning, the day after she had attended a charity event for the Chicago Children's Hospital. She remembered how her body felt different, tender, exhausted, and oddly nauseous. Urged by her best friend, Emily, she decided to take a pregnancy test. When the result turned positive, she had burst into tears of unbridled joy. Ethan was overjoyed. Although they'd talked about having children in the near future, he never anticipated the wave of emotions he would feel at the news. He began poring over baby name books, and every store window displaying baby cribs caught his attention. Catherine took great pleasure in teasing him about how seriously he took it all. "Ethan," she'd say, "the baby won't arrive for many months. You can relax a little." But Ethan couldn't. He loved planning and preparing, especially now that they had a little human to think about. They hired a reputable obstetrician, Dr. Leonard Hayes, who had a state-of-the-art clinic near Lake Shore Drive. Catherine's checkups became part of their routine. Ethan insisted on accompanying her, even skipping important meetings to hear the heartbeat of his baby. Their excitement was a shared secret in the office halls and dinner parties alike. Whenever Catherine placed her hands on her growing belly, Ethan would stop everything to watch in wonder. Yet beneath all the joy and celebration, the demands on Ethan's time grew heavier. His business expansions required constant traveling to various branch offices. The success of Sinclair Innovations brought an ever-increasing number of responsibilities. With Catherine's encouragement, he continued to expand, convinced that the more he built now, the more secure their future family would be. And as everything seemed to align perfectly, neither could have imagined the betrayal that loomed just around the corner. Victoria Harlow was an assistant project manager at Sinclair Innovations. Brilliant, ambitious, and fiercely competitive, she had joined the company fresh out of Stanford's business program. Although Victoria exhibited remarkable talent, her attitude had raised flags among some colleagues. She preferred personal gain over teamwork. But results mattered in corporate America, and Ethan rewarded results. Victoria's first notable achievement came when she successfully managed a lucrative project with a well-known automobile manufacturer. Her efficiency gained Ethan's trust. Soon he found himself relying on her for crucial international negotiations, especially in Asia, where Sinclair Innovations was looking to expand. During a trip to Singapore to finalize a partnership deal, Ethan and Victoria spent countless hours together fine-tuning proposals, discussing strategies, and meeting potential partners. The long nights of negotiations sometimes bled into social events, dinner meetings, or after-office celebrations. Ethan, always respectful, never once considered his interactions with Victoria to be anything more than professional. Yet, he was subtly aware of how her smile lingered a second too long, how her compliments occasionally felt more personal than professional. For her part, Victoria nursed a growing infatuation. She admired Ethan's confidence, his relentless drive, and his magnetic presence in the boardroom. She was drawn to his aura of success, and the fact that he was already married, expecting a child, did not deter her. If anything, it made her want him more fiercely. She perceived Catherine as a barrier to the prize she believed was destined to be hers. One night, after sealing a major deal, Victoria found Ethan alone at the hotel bar, sipping a celebratory glass of champagne and drafting an email to Catherine. She slid into the seat next to him, setting in motion a chain of events that neither of them could take back. But the real tragedy lay in how skillfully Victoria would spin the truth. That night in Singapore, Ethan was exhausted from back-to-back meetings. Catherine had texted him a picture of herself wearing a comfortable maternity dress, her belly visibly rounder than when he last saw her. He wanted desperately to be home, feeling the baby kick, whispering sweet nothings to Catherine. But duty kept him oceans away. His longing was so strong that even the celebratory mood around the latest partnership felt hollow. Victoria approached him quietly. She ordered a glass of wine and took a seat, congratulating him on another successful deal. Ethan thanked her warmly, acknowledging her hard work. A typical conversation about next steps quickly gave way to more personal topics. Victoria steered the conversation toward Ethan's marriage, asking how Catherine was coping with the pregnancy. He spoke glowingly of Catherine, but no matter how many times he praised his wife, Victoria kept questioning him in a sultry tone, planting subtle seeds of doubt. "It must be tough," she said, swirling her wine, her eyes gleaming. "Being away from home while your wife is alone. You trust she's doing fine, right?" Ethan frowned at the suggestion. "Of course I trust Catherine. I'm the one who feels guilty for leaving her alone, but she's a strong woman." Victoria lowered her gaze, as if in sympathy. "Strong, yes. But you never know how lonely people cope. Not to be cynical, I've just seen how complicated relationships can get." Her insinuations were delicate enough to slip under Ethan's defenses. Yet something inside him bristled at her words. "I have complete faith in my wife," he replied, curtly, sipping his champagne as if to signal the end of the conversation. But that night was only the beginning. By planting the smallest hint of suspicion, Victoria laid the groundwork for a much bigger manipulation, a lie that would change everything when they returned to Chicago. Back in Chicago, Catherine was elated to see Ethan return from Asia. She met him at O'Hare International Airport with a bright smile despite her baby bump, making every task more cumbersome. Ethan felt an immediate wave of guilt for the fleeting doubts Victoria had sown in his mind. The moment he hugged Catherine, her warmth melted away those seeds of suspicion. He resolved to put Victoria's veiled comments behind him and focus on his growing family. For the next few weeks, life fell back into a familiar rhythm. Catherine attended her prenatal yoga classes at a studio near Millennium Park. In her spare time, she worked on freelance interior design projects to keep her creative mind active, though she had officially taken a leave from Haven and company. Meanwhile, Ethan dove back into board meetings and local expansion plans. He spared every spare minute for Catherine, checking in with her multiple times a day. But Victoria was never far away. She had a direct line to Ethan, given her role in the company's expansion strategy. Periodically, she would drop by his office unannounced, delivering urgent files or requesting signatures. She made sure to appear indispensable, but with each interaction, she also sought to learn more about Catherine, her schedule, her routines, and her friend circles. As the months progressed, the tension in Ethan's life grew. Catherine was well into her second trimester and needed him more than ever. He felt torn between his responsibilities as the CEO and his responsibilities as a future father. In an attempt to do it all, he began to rely on Victoria even more for business tasks. Victoria, in turn, used every opportunity to deepen her bond with Ethan. She thrived on his dependence, believing it gave her leverage to insert herself further into his personal world. During a particularly busy week, Ethan had to attend a 3-day conference in Los Angeles to promote the latest software product from Sinclair Innovations. Catherine, 7 months pregnant, urged him to go, promising that she had everything under control at home. She insisted that her mom would come to stay with her, ensuring she wasn't alone. Reluctantly, Ethan left, making sure Catherine had every phone number, every resource, just in case. Victoria, of course, was scheduled to be at that same conference. Her sharp negotiating skills were invaluable for dealing with investors. Over 3 days, in between panel discussions, business dinners, and cocktails with potential clients, Ethan noticed Victoria becoming more physically affectionate. At first, it was small gestures, a hand brushing against his arm, a whisper in his ear under the pretense of the conference hall's noise. He tried to brush it off, reminding himself that he was a married man, soon to be a father. But her familiarity unsettled him. Then, on the final night of the conference, something happened that Ethan would regret. After a successful networking event at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, several attendees proposed an after-party at a nearby lounge. Ethan, exhausted and longing for Catherine, decided to leave early. Victoria offered to escort him back to the hotel, claiming she wanted to discuss a potential Korean deal they were working on. In the elevator ride up to his suite, Victoria pressed the stop button mid-floor. Before Ethan could react, she leaned in to kiss him, catching him completely off guard. He jerked away, stunned. "What are you doing?" he demanded, heart pounding. His anger boiled over, and he pushed her hand away as she tried to caress his cheek. Victoria's expression shifted. Her eyes glinted with a triumphant sparkle, as if she had just confirmed something she already suspected. "I'm sorry," she murmured, before releasing the stop button and letting the elevator ascend again. The next day, Ethan boarded his flight to Chicago with a heavy heart, determined to distance himself from Victoria. Unbeknownst to him, the seeds of deceit she was about to sow would run much deeper than a stolen moment in an elevator. Back in Chicago, Catherine sensed a change in Ethan's demeanor. He seemed more anxious, more distant. He tried to mask his worries, but Catherine had always been attuned to his moods. She pressed him gently, asking if something had gone wrong with the conference. Ethan, unsure of how to broach the topic of Victoria's advance without alarming his heavily pregnant wife, simply said the trip had been stressful. He promised he would handle everything and that she should focus on rest. Meanwhile, Victoria was about to escalate her game. She was emboldened by Ethan's reaction in the elevator. Despite his rejection, she was convinced that Ethan was vulnerable in ways Catherine couldn't understand. She began dropping gossip within the office, hinting that Catherine might be unfaithful, just subtle comments to the right people who loved to chatter. She knew such rumors would eventually reach Ethan's ears in one form or another. Soon, Ethan started hearing whispers from colleagues. Innocent remarks like, "I saw Catherine having lunch with a male friend the other day. Seemed cozy," or "She's been getting close to some old friend, hasn't she?" These half-truths twisted reality. Catherine had indeed met a friend, Jonathan, a fellow interior designer from her college days, but the meeting was purely professional. He sought Catherine's insight on a small residential project. Victoria, ever cunning, made sure to be there whenever these rumors reached Ethan. She offered him a sympathetic ear, always leading the conversation back to the inherent unpredictability of relationships. In my experience, she'd say, in a hushed tone, distance creates temptation, especially if the partner is craving emotional support. With each conversation, a flicker of doubt began to ignite in Ethan's mind, overshadowing his better judgment. He reasoned that Catherine was a good person, but he also knew how lonely pregnancy could be. Catherine's pregnancy advanced into the final month. The baby shower was a lavish affair organized by her close friends and financed generously by Ethan. Held at a penthouse suite overlooking Lake Michigan, the gathering included an array of high-profile guests, clients from Sinclair Innovations, Catherine's colleagues from Haven and Company, and friends from both families. Pink and blue balloons adorned the room, as Catherine had decided to keep the baby's gender a surprise until birth. Ethan tried to be the supportive husband, smiling and mingling with the guests, but he was distracted. Every time he saw Catherine laughing with a male friend, his mind revisited the rumors. An inexplicable anger curled in his stomach. He caught himself glaring at Jonathan, the same friend Catherine had lunch with. Rationally, Ethan knew Catherine had never hidden anything from him. Yet, the seeds Victoria planted had taken root, and the world looked different, now suspicious, precarious. Toward the end of the event, Catherine found Ethan staring out at the lake, lost in thought. She wrapped her arm around him, placing his hand on her belly. "Feel that?" she asked softly. Their baby was kicking vigorously. Ethan smiled, his heart clenching with love and guilt. He should trust Catherine. He knew that, so why couldn't he shake his suspicion? They returned home that evening, exhausted from the celebration. Catherine was radiant and talkative, still on a high from the baby shower. Ethan listened, but his responses were half-hearted. She sensed his tension. "Ethan, is something wrong?" "You've been so distant lately," she asked, her voice tinged with concern. He forced a reassuring smile, pressing his forehead to hers. "Just stressed about the company," he lied. "But I'm okay, as long as you and the baby are okay." Catherine, though not entirely convinced, decided to give him space, hoping he would share more when he was ready. As the due date approached, Catherine's health became more delicate. She experienced occasional dizzy spells, and her doctor insisted on frequent rest. Ethan, torn between an upcoming product launch and his desire to be near Catherine, reluctantly put Victoria in charge of finalizing all negotiations. That decision was the key Victoria needed. She now had free rein to act on his behalf, signing off on deals and traveling for contract negotiations. But more importantly, it gave her frequent, direct access to Ethan under the guise of updates. One evening, Victoria called Ethan at home. He was upstairs in the nursery, assembling a rocking chair when his phone buzzed. "Ethan, I need to talk to you. It's urgent," came Victoria's anxious voice on the other end. He set aside his tools, worry flooding his features. "About what?" Victoria hesitated. "It's about Catherine. I have to tell you something. I've been meaning to say it for a while, but I didn't know how." His chest tightened, suspicion creeping in. "Go on," he said, his voice edged with a foreboding he couldn't name. She spun a fabricated tale that Catherine had been seen multiple times with Jonathan, and that whispers around the office indicated it was more than just a friendship. She even claimed to have accidentally overheard them at a restaurant, discussing how Catherine might leave Ethan once she got enough financial leverage. Her story was detailed, too detailed. She painted Jonathan as an aspiring entrepreneur who wanted to secure an in at Sinclair Innovations, and Catherine as the cunning wife, forging a new path behind Ethan's back. By the time Victoria was done speaking, Ethan felt as though the world was spinning. Anger clashed with disbelief. He wanted to trust Catherine, but Victoria's sincerity was unnerving. His mind swirled with the half-truths that had haunted him for weeks. When he hung up, he stared at the half-assembled rocking chair, his vision blurred by tears he refused to let fall. The next morning, Ethan walked into the master bedroom, only to find Catherine asleep with her hand protectively over her belly. He watched her for a long moment, torn between love and the insidious doubt gnawing at him. He recalled every moment of their relationship, her unwavering support, her laughter, her gentle kisses, and tried to reconcile it with the picture Victoria had painted. Finally, he resolved to talk to Catherine directly, but fate had other plans. Before Ethan could muster the courage, Catherine woke in distress. She felt a searing pain shoot through her abdomen. Panic surged as she clutched Ethan's hand, her face contorting in pain. Within minutes, they were rushing to the hospital. Dr. Hayes examined Catherine thoroughly. "She's experiencing early labor contractions," he said, concern etched on his face. "It might be stress-related, or the baby might just be ready to come sooner than expected. We'll keep her under observation." Ethan's heart pounded in fear. He stayed by her bedside, smoothing back her hair and whispering soothing words. All doubts momentarily vanished, replaced by the realization that Catherine and the baby's well-being was all that mattered. As the doctors monitored her condition, Catherine gripped Ethan's hand, searching his eyes for reassurance. "I'm here," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "I'm not leaving." Eventually, the contractions subsided, and Catherine was moved to a private room. Exhausted, she drifted to sleep. Ethan sat nearby, his thoughts spiraling. He wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding. But the rumors, Victoria's story, could they all be fabrications? A part of him wanted absolute proof. Another part wanted to dismiss it all and trust the woman he married. Unbeknownst to Ethan, Victoria had learned about Catherine's sudden hospital admission. She saw the crisis as an opportunity to sow more chaos, fully determined to replace Catherine in Ethan's life. After Catherine stabilized, Ethan drove home to pick up some essentials for her hospital stay. The house felt eerie in her absence, shadows cast by the late afternoon sun stretching across the hall. He walked into the kitchen and nearly jumped when he spotted Victoria standing at the back door, holding a folder. She wore a sympathetic smile that, to him, now felt predatory. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, startled and annoyed. He hadn't even heard her knock or ring the bell. Victoria approached him cautiously, a mask of concern on her face. "I'm sorry to barge in like this. I wanted to give you these documents. They're urgent." She paused, looking around the house. "How's Catherine? She's stable," Ethan replied in a clipped tone. "But she needs rest." Victoria nodded. I know this is a difficult time, but there's something else I've discovered, something you need to see." She extended her phone toward him. On the screen was a blurry photo of Catherine and Jonathan at a cafe. They were sitting closely, smiling. At face value, it looked like an ordinary lunch, but Victoria pointed at their clasped hands. "You see, this is a friend of mine who took this picture." Catherine and Jonathan left moments later. Ethan examined the photo, a knot twisting in his gut. He recognized Catherine's coat, the same one she wore the day she mentioned meeting an old friend for lunch. He hadn't minded at the time, but now, this image taken out of context fell into line with Victoria's ongoing narrative. He looked away, refusing to acknowledge the churn of jealousy and betrayal in his stomach. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, trying to sound decisive. But, in reality, the photo stung. A flash of anger rose in his chest. For the first time, he wondered if Victoria might be telling the truth. Or was he simply falling into her trap? Ethan spent a restless night at the hospital, dozing in the chair beside Catherine's bed. He awoke to the sound of her labored breathing in the early hours, and panic jolted him upright. Catherine's eyes fluttered open, and she offered a weak smile. "I'm okay," she rasped. "The nurse just checked on me. The baby's heartbeat is strong." Relief filled Ethan, but so did an overwhelming sense of guilt. He was grateful that Catherine and the baby were safe, yet part of him was consumed by the photo Victoria had shown him. He hated that his mind wouldn't let it go, even in the face of Catherine's vulnerability. Over the next day, Catherine underwent more tests. The baby appeared ready to arrive at any moment, though the obstetric team hoped to delay labor to ensure full-term development. Ethan hovered nearby, forcing a calm he didn't feel. Catherine noticed his tense shoulders and the distant gaze in his eyes. She questioned him again, but he waved it off as exhaustion. On the second day, Catherine was allowed to walk around the hospital corridor with a nurse's supervision. She felt an urge to confide in Ethan about something on her mind. She had sensed a shift in the dynamic of their relationship, and she couldn't dismiss the possibility that another woman might be behind it. Catherine had no proof, only intuition, but she brushed away the thought. Ethan was her husband, and she believed in him. During Catherine's afternoon nap, Ethan stepped out to grab a coffee. His phone buzzed. It was Victoria, texting him updates about the new client contract. At the end of her message, she added, "I hope Catherine's doing better, but please remember, we need your signature by 3 p.m. Let me know if I can drop by." Ethan stared at the screen, torn between his responsibilities to the company and the intensifying confusion in his heart. On the third night, Catherine woke at midnight, her face wet with tears. She nudged Ethan awake, and he found her trembling, her eyes reflecting heartbreak. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking, "am I losing you?" His chest tightened. He reached for her hand. "Why? Why would you say that?" he managed, though a lump formed in his throat. She hesitated, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. "I can feel you pulling away. It's like you're locked in some private battle you won't share with me. I don't know what I did wrong." Ethan's mind flashed with images, Victoria's insinuations, the photo, the rumors. His internal struggle was tearing him apart. He closed his eyes, wishing he could blink all the doubts away. "You haven't done anything wrong," he whispered, finally. "It's just, business has been complicated. There are rumors, and I don't know who to trust anymore." She studied him, concern laced with an unspoken question, but he offered no further explanation. Catherine pressed her lips together, sensing his reticence, but deciding not to push. She was about to speak again when another contraction racked her body. Alarmed, Ethan rushed to call the nurse. The contractions were stronger this time, more frequent. Within minutes, Dr. Hayes and the obstetric team hurried in, preparing for a possible early delivery. Ethan clutched Catherine's hand, fear overshadowing his doubts. He murmured assurances into her ear, promising to keep her safe, to always be there. Catherine squeezed his hand until her knuckles turned white, tears mingling with sweat. The pain was intense, but she drew strength from the belief that Ethan was by her side. And in that moment, nothing mattered more than bringing their child into the world safely, despite the storm of hidden lies swirling around them. In the early dawn light, Catherine gave birth to a baby boy. The hours leading up to the delivery were filled with tension and pain, but the moment she heard her son's cry, relief and joy washed over her. Ethan, tears streaming down his face, cut the umbilical cord, emotions surging through him in a wave of awe, love, and regret. They named him Lucas, a name Catherine had cherished since she was a little girl. As the nurses cleaned the newborn and placed him in Catherine's arms, Ethan hovered close, gently touching the soft wisps of hair on Lucas's head. For a fleeting moment, all suspicions and rumors vanished. Nothing could overshadow the miracle of his son's arrival. Catherine gazed at Lucas with exhaustion and wonder. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes shimmering with gratitude and love. "We did it," she whispered. "He's here, our little boy." Ethan leaned over, kissing her forehead. In that heartbeat of pure emotion, he remembered why he loved her, how they had built this dream together. The next few days were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and midnight cries. Catherine remained in the hospital for observation since the birth was slightly premature, but Lucas proved strong and healthy, passing every test with flying colors. Ethan spent as much time as possible with them, ignoring business calls and letting Victoria handle the deals. Each time the phone vibrated, a pang of anxiety cut through him. He worried about what new rumor might unfold, yet part of him wanted to remain in this cocoon of fatherhood, away from the chaos. Catherine, though physically drained, felt an overwhelming sense of peace whenever she looked at Ethan cradling Lucas in his arms. She believed that nothing could break them now, that their new son symbolized a bond stronger than any external threat. It was the day they brought Lucas home that things began to fracture at an accelerated pace. The Sinclair mansion, large and echoing in its grandeur, suddenly felt warm with the coos of a newborn. Catherine and Ethan wanted to create a safe haven for their son. They reorganized the master bedroom so that Lucas's bassinet was within arm's reach. Catherine's mother came by to help, and for a while the house bustled with a gentle chaos that overshadowed any unease. However, a week later, Victoria showed up unexpectedly. Catherine was feeding Lucas in the living room, still adjusting to the rhythms of motherhood. When the doorbell rang, Catherine rose slowly, balancing Lucas against her shoulder. She was startled to see Victoria on the doorstep with a grim expression. "Ethan's not here," Catherine said, politely, her tone guarded. Victoria glanced at Catherine's worn face and the tiny bundle in her arms. "I know," she replied. "I came to see you." Catherine blinked in confusion. She had never been close to Victoria. They were merely acquaintances through Ethan's business. "Is everything all right?" she asked, stepping aside to let Victoria in. Victoria entered cautiously, eyes drifting around the foyer as though searching for something. She handed over a sealed envelope and said, "I'm sorry to be the one to do this, but Ethan deserves to know the truth." With that cryptic statement, she slipped out before Catherine could ask further questions. Inside the envelope was a printed email exchange, fabricated in a disturbingly thorough manner. It appeared to be a dialogue between Catherine and Jonathan, discussing an alleged affair, with lines suggesting Catherine wanted to leave Ethan once she secured financial stability. The email was dated just a few days before Lucas's birth. Catherine's heart hammered in her chest. She knew instantly it was a lie, but how would Ethan react? The seeds of doubt Victoria had planted were about to bear sinister fruit. When Ethan returned that evening, Catherine was sitting in the nursery, tears streaking her cheeks as she rocked Lucas. Before he could say anything, she handed him the envelope. "Victoria brought this," she said, her voice trembling with anger and fear. He read the printed emails, his expression darkening. A maelstrom of emotions whirled within him, resentment toward Victoria, confusion at Catherine, and a nagging sense of betrayal that refused to leave him. Though a part of him wanted to dismiss the emails as obvious forgeries, they aligned too perfectly with the rumors Victoria had been feeding him for months. Catherine insisted, "It's fake. I would never do this. Jonathan is a friend, that's all." Ethan walked out of the nursery, pacing the hallway, eyes wild with conflicted thoughts. Why would Victoria fabricate this? He questioned. But even as he spoke, he heard the hollowness in his voice. People did lie for personal gain, but the avalanche of evidence, fabricated or not, was overwhelming. Catherine, cuddling Lucas protectively, followed him. "You have to trust me, Ethan," she pleaded. "I've never lied to you, never even thought of being with anyone else. I carried your child." His gaze fell upon Lucas, stirring a protective love that clashed with a growing conviction that something was awry. "I need space," he muttered. "This is too much. I need time to think." Catherine felt her world collapsing. She watched him walk away into his study, shutting the door behind him. Never had she believed their marriage could be threatened by outside forces. But here they were, brand new parents, with a rift so large it was tearing at the seams of their life together. She could only hope that Ethan would see the truth before it was too late. Days turned into a tumultuous few weeks. The tension between Ethan and Catherine was palpable. While Catherine spent sleepless nights caring for Lucas, Ethan slept in the guest room, claiming it was to avoid disturbing her when he left early for work. In reality, he was wrestling with his own demons. He felt betrayed, humiliated, and deeply confused. Victoria, meanwhile, seized the opportunity. She began dropping by the house under the pretense of delivering urgent documents or requesting Ethan's signature at odd hours. Each time, Catherine felt violated, yet she was too emotionally drained to argue. She repeatedly told Ethan he needed to set boundaries with Victoria, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. He responded that Victoria was simply doing her job, and it wasn't fair to punish her professionally for personal issues. Anger and resentment roiled in Catherine's heart. She felt trapped, as if no matter what she said, Ethan already believed the worst. One afternoon, while Ethan was at the office, Catherine decided to confront Jonathan directly. She called him, voice shaky, explaining the situation. Jonathan was shocked and horrified. He swore he had no knowledge of any fabricated emails and offered to speak to Ethan personally. Yet, Catherine hesitated. She knew that even if Jonathan attested to her innocence, Ethan might dismiss it as them conspiring to cover up the affair. The strain on her health began to show. She suffered migraines and bouts of fatigue. Dr. Hayes recommended more rest, but rest was a luxury Catherine couldn't afford when her marriage and family were on the brink of collapse. As the weeks crawled forward, a cold distance settled between Ethan and Catherine. Their conversations were clipped, transactional, revolving around Lucas's feeding schedule or doctor visits. And all the while, the shadow of Victoria lingered, threatening to tear them apart. The pivotal blow came a month later. Catherine discovered a receipt for a diamond necklace in Ethan's jacket pocket. She knew it wasn't for her. He hadn't gifted her anything recently. Confronting him late one evening, she demanded an explanation. "Is there another woman, Ethan?" He froze, color draining from his face. "That's for a business associate. A gesture of thanks," he stammered. But the way he avoided her eyes told Catherine all she needed to know. Her voice quivered, tears threatening to overflow. "Is it Victoria?" He didn't respond immediately, which was answer enough. Catherine stormed out of the house, sobbing. She ended up at her parents' place, with Lucas in tow. Her mother, shaken to see her daughter in such turmoil, wrapped them both in comforting arms. Meanwhile, Ethan, overwhelmed by guilt, found himself at Victoria's penthouse. Though he had never slept with Victoria, He'd crossed emotional boundaries he knew he shouldn't have. Unable to face the chaos at home, he rationalized his arrival at her door as seeking solace. Victoria welcomed him inside with open arms. With practiced sympathy, she coaxed him into sharing his doubts, his anger, and his hurt. She offered him a glass of bourbon, letting him rant about how Catherine betrayed him, fueling his misconceptions further. In that vulnerable state, Ethan fell deeper into Victoria's carefully laid trap. They didn't sleep together that night, but their emotional bond solidified as Victoria skillfully positioned herself as the one person Ethan could count on. The diamond necklace sat in its case on a nearby table, shining under the penthouse lights like a trophy. Ethan glanced at it, recalling the promise he'd made himself to remain faithful to Catherine. That promise now felt as hollow as his heart, and in that moment he sealed his fate. The following week, Catherine filed for separation. It was a drastic measure, one she never dreamed she'd consider, especially with a newborn in her arms. But Ethan's betrayal and his refusal to believe her innocence left her no choice. Legal paperwork arrived at Sinclair Innovations, stirring a whirl of gossip among employees. Word spread like wildfire, and soon everyone knew that the once golden couple was on the brink of collapse. Victoria feigned concern. She encouraged Ethan to be strong and assured him that it was Catherine's loss. Meanwhile, Catherine sought refuge at her parents' modest home in Wisconsin, away from the prying eyes of Chicago's high society. She spent her days caring for Lucas and confiding in her childhood friends, who rallied around her in unwavering support. Jonathan, feeling partially responsible for the turmoil, visited Catherine to apologize for anything that might have fueled the rumors. Together, they hired a private investigator to prove the emails were forged. The investigator worked diligently, tracing the digital fingerprints that led back to an anonymous IP address in Chicago. It was only a matter of time before a solid lead pointed toward Victoria, but Catherine, worried it might be too late, Ethan's heart and mind seemed out of reach. As weeks turned into a month, Ethan went through the motions: work, negotiation, expansion. His nights were sleepless, haunted by memories of Catherine. Despite Victoria's attempts to comfort him, he felt hollow. Sometimes, in the quiet of his penthouse, he'd stare at pictures of Catherine on his phone, remembering the woman who had captivated him with her warmth and sincerity. He missed Lucas too, but his pride and anger kept him from picking up the phone. In the background, fate's gears were turning, preparing to reveal the truth when the cost would be highest. Tragedy struck on a winter morning in February. Catherine was driving back to Chicago, intending to meet with the private investigator who had uncovered irrefutable proof of Victoria's deceit. On the way, her car slid on an icy patch along the highway. It swerved uncontrollably before crashing into a guardrail. Paramedics rushed her to the nearest hospital, but her injuries were severe. By the time her parents arrived, Catherine was unconscious. The doctors did everything they could, but her condition worsened quickly. News of the accident reached Ethan late in the evening. He was in a meeting with Victoria, but the moment he heard Catherine was in critical condition, he left immediately, ignoring Victoria's protests. He sped to the hospital, heart pounding, a litany of regrets filling his mind. The guilt he'd repressed surged, choking him with the fear that he might lose Catherine forever before he could make amends. When he arrived at the ICU, Catherine's parents refused to let him near her. They blamed him for the stress that had driven their daughter away, for the heartbreak they believed contributed to her distracted state on the road. Desperate, Ethan pleaded and begged, tears streaming down his face. He swore he still loved Catherine, that he'd been misled. But her parents held firm. Hours later, a doctor approached, expression grim. Catherine's injuries were too severe. Her body was shutting down. She was placed on life support, unresponsive, the flicker of life fading with each labored breath. Ethan collapsed into a chair in the waiting room, weeping openly, replaying every moment he had doubted her, every time he'd shut her out. He prayed for a miracle, for one last chance to tell her he believed her, that he was sorry, that he still loved her. But fate would not be so kind. Catherine passed away 2 days later, never regaining consciousness. The funeral was a somber affair in Chicago, attended by friends, family, and many from Sinclair Innovations. She was laid to rest in a tranquil cemetery near Lake Michigan, the same city she had cherished. A hush fell over the attendees as they gathered beneath a grey winter sky, the wind whipping their coats and stinging their eyes. Ethan stood at the graveside, holding Lucas, who was too young to understand the enormity of the loss. His tears flowed freely, regret carving itself into every line of his face. He recalled the day Catherine told him she was pregnant, the baby shower, the night he held her hand in the hospital. He remembered the warmth of her smile, the kindness in her eyes, and her unwavering love. Now it was too late to right his wrongs, to dispel the lies he'd believed. After the ceremony, Catherine's best friend, Emily, approached Ethan with the private investigator's findings. They had discovered the source of the forged emails, Victoria's home IP address. Additionally, a digital trail revealed she had manipulated the photograph of Catherine and Jonathan. David, a longtime colleague of Ethan's, confirmed Victoria's meddling. The truth, laid out plainly, was a cruel vindication. Catherine had never been unfaithful. Ethan felt the weight of this revelation crush him, as if the earth had split open at his feet. In that moment, he understood the magnitude of his failure to trust, to stand by Catherine, to protect her from the venom that slithered into their lives. He sank to his knees, clutching Lucas to his chest, sobbing apologies into the cold winter air. But no apology could bring Catherine back. The finality of her loss seared into his heart, an indelible scar. The funeral ended, but the consequences of Victoria's deceit were just beginning. Ethan fell into a deep depression. Guilt and grief intertwined, making him question every choice he'd made. Lucas was his only tether to sanity. Determined to honor Catherine's memory, he devoted himself to fatherhood, hiring a nanny but insisting on being present for every feeding and diaper change he could manage. Each day, he glanced at the empty nursery rocking chair, remembering the night he'd started assembling it before doubt poisoned his love. Professionally, Ethan's world also began to unravel. The scandal surrounding Catherine's death made shareholders anxious. They questioned his judgment, especially since Victoria remained in a high-level position. The brand image of Sinclair Innovations took a hit. Loyal employees whispered that the CEO's personal entanglements had cost an innocent woman her life. Contracts wavered, and some deals collapsed, including the ones Victoria had overseen. Shortly after the funeral, the private investigator's evidence became public. Ethan wasted no time firing Victoria, stripping her of her position and publicly condemning her actions. Lawsuits loomed on the horizon as Catherine's family considered pressing charges for defamation and emotional distress. Victoria found herself blacklisted in the corporate world. The diamond necklace Ethan had purchased remained unopened in its box, a haunting symbol of her manipulative ambition. In a final blow of karma, Victoria's attempts to find a new job in the tech industry were met with rejection. Her credibility shattered, she sank into legal troubles, facing fines and potential jail time for forgery and defamation. What she had once built her reputation, her professional network, crumbled overnight. For Ethan, life became an exercise in penance. He donated millions to charities in Catherine's name, established a foundation supporting single mothers, and tried to salvage Sinclair Innovations' reputation by being as transparent as possible with the board. But no amount of money or philanthropic efforts could erase the regret gnawing at his soul. He moved out of the lavish mansion, finding its empty halls too painful to bear. Instead, he purchased a smaller home near the outskirts of Chicago, where he aimed to raise Lucas in a quieter environment. He kept Catherine's memory alive through photographs, telling Lucas stories of the mother he would never know. Catherine's parents allowed Ethan to see their grandson, but their relationship remained icy. They never forgave him fully for believing the mistress's lies. Each meeting was tinged with sorrow and the unspoken reminder of the woman who had been wronged at the worst possible time. 6 months after Catherine's funeral, Ethan returned to her gravesite. Lucas, now old enough to babble, was in his arms. The sky was overcast, mirroring his somber mood. He kneeled by the tombstone, running his fingers over Catherine's engraved name. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears threatening. "I wish I had believed you. I wish so many things." Lucas stirred, reaching out to pat his father's cheek, a small gesture that tore at Ethan's heart. He pressed a gentle kiss on Lucas's forehead, vowing silently that he would never fail their son the way he had failed Catherine. And so he stood, placing a single white rose against the cold marble. With Lucas in his arms, he walked away, haunted by the knowledge that sometimes the truth comes too late, and regret is the only inheritance we leave for ourselves. Dear viewers, if this tragic story resonated with you, let it serve as a solemn reminder that doubt and deception can destroy even the strongest bonds. Trust your heart, seek honest dialogue, and never let malicious whispers dictate your beliefs. Ethan's regret stands as a harsh lesson. Love is fragile, and listening to lies can shatter what took years to build in a matter of moments. If you ever find yourself questioning someone you cherish, communicate openly before it's too late. Because once the truth is buried beneath suspicion, you might only discover its purity when you've already lost everything. If you found value in this tale, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Spread the word so others can learn from Ethan's heartbreak. And remember that trust, once broken, may never be fully restored. Be vigilant and always guard the bonds that truly matter.